Eleanor, what a pleasure to spend this time with you. I'm thrilled that
Amazing
you're
to be
here.
here. So
For
great.
those of my readers that haven't had the privilege of reading Eleanor, you're in for a real treat today. And mostly we're going to be exploring this incredible book that is going to be released January 28th. So by the time this comes out, that's going to be just a few weeks away. But we also know Eleanor for her Substack called The Literary Obsessive and her incredible serialized novel that's out right now called Fallout. I want to talk to her about all of her work, but today we're going to focus on In Judgement of Others, the book that's coming out January 28th. So without further ado, I want to jump in because there is so much that we want to cover today. And um, I feel it kind of fluttering in my heart even right now because Eleanor, you have such a raw urgency to your words, to your characters, to your content. And when I read you, I feel that urgency. And so it's sort of bubbling up right now, even as I talk to you. And I feel that this book in particular really illuminates some of the urgency of the themes that you discuss, which is essentially around mental illness. And it really lays bare the torment between mental illness and society's responses to it. So, what inspired you to address this very complex topic and some of the different privileges of mental health disorders, diagnoses? And did any real world experiences shape these portrayals?
I mean, I can feel a fluttering as well as I'm sitting here talking to you. And because this book really was born, as what most of my work is, it was born out of a rage, really, a raw and a rage around an injustice. Um, I have a very dear friend, it's dedicated to them at the front of the book. When it comes out, everyone will see it's dedicated to my impossible friend. And this friend of mine I've known since we were about 18 years old, probably. Um, and I think they'll be all right in me saying that there's a section in the book where I reference the very first time Tessa's section, which is when she's 21, which happens at her 21st birthday party that she never turns up to because she's been sectioned. And that really did happen. That was the very first section for my friend. We all went to her 21st birthday party. She didn't.
Wow.
Yeah. And, you know, she's a remarkable person. She's incredibly funny. She's out there at the far reaches of the universe. And she pays the price for that. And not everyone does who's out there. I'm pretty out there at the far reaches too. So not everyone pays that price, but for various reasons, which obviously I won't go into here because that's her story, hers has become a trauma and a diagnosis of bipolar. And I think, you know, over the 30 years that we've known each other, and she's been in and out of section at least 10 times in that time, I've really witnessed how, I'm going to say society at large, the society around her, treat her illness, condition, her act outs, her behavior. And there's so much condemnation attached and so much shame attached. And it's not without knowing. And in fact, I was speaking to someone the other day at an event who has a sister who's bipolar. And she said, oh God, I really snapped at her the other day because I was just like, come on, pull yourself together. And of course, there's room for management in all conditions. There's no question about it. There's agency somewhere in all conditions. But to blame somebody for what they have is absolutely not a starting point. But more than that, I have also been in close contact with other kinds of mental health conditions. And I don't really want to give away what the other one is in the book because I think it'll be too much of a reveal. Though I have talked about it in the past. But it's my experience that there are other mental health conditions for which you will be made president. Hopefully not twice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And we'll know by the time this comes out what
Yep.
the result is.
Yep.
But the fact is that we as a society will, for various reasons, which I'm really happy to go into, we will celebrate some psychotic conditions because I think it's because our limbic brain must belong, and we will belong with the biggest, loudest voice in the room. And there are certain conditions which demand a belonging, and there are others which are so shameful and shunful we lock up. And really, the book is a cry of rage that we just treat people equally. We treat illnesses equally. I've made this comparison before, actually, around the difference between somebody who's diagnosed with cancer and someone who's diagnosed with HIV. And I'm close to many people with both diagnoses. And I've witnessed firsthand, both in terms of how uh, legals treat both of those, in
Yeah.
terms of what you're able to reach out for, the resources that are made available to you.
Yeah.
You know, one comes with absolute compassion, as it should, and the other one, which is deserving of compassion equally, comes with a whole lot of blame and shame. So
Oh my God.
I really wanted to bring that up in terms of mental health. So that's where this novel came from. It was a cry of rage, outrage. Often my books either come from desire for revenge, revenge, which tends to temper by the end, and I come up with something else,
Yeah.
or just straight up outrage. This is not okay. My friend is a brilliant, impossible person, as we all are. It just happens to be that her trauma acts out with the kind of behavior that we just do not want to look at.
Yep.
And I do think as well, because we put this book out to be, we submitted it to mainstream when I first wrote it, which was 5 years ago, and we didn't get a buyer. And my agent said, you know, I just wonder if it's just they don't want to look at
Yeah.
what this, you know. And I was like, okay. It was pretty heartbreaking, but I'm so
That's
glad Substack's given me the chance to air it.
yes. And so it's so necessary, Eleanor. I'm reminded of a woman that I worked with on a mental health miniseries who graciously gave us her time while she was in hospice for dying of ovarian cancer. But it was a mental health series, so we were more talking about her PTSD diagnosis. And she said when she was diagnosed with PTSD, no one showed up at her door. No one showed up with casseroles. People didn't
Right.
know what to say. When she was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, the house was flooded with
You
love.
couldn't hold them back. Right. You know, and I think, of course, that's wonderful they turn up for the ovarian cancer, but what about the complex PTSD?
Right.
And I think as well, you know, what I didn't get into in this book, and I've talked to Sarah Fay about this in her brilliant book, Pathological, is around the whole diagnoses question, which is a whole other section, which I just couldn't get into. But I know for Tessa, I hope what I've outlined and I hope what it becomes plain is that, yes, she's diagnosed with bipolar, but beneath that is trauma. And
Hmm.
it is my experience when in close contact with friends and relatives and who are diagnosed with these conditions, I've never known someone without one that, and the same with addiction, where trauma isn't the bedrock. I haven't seen it. Maybe that exists, but I sure haven't seen it.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that that's addressed. Well, let's get to the trauma in a
Yeah.
little bit, but I actually want to have you read um, the last section of chapter one. We're talking about Tessa here. Tessa is this fictional character who's diagnosed with bipolar, and it's such a powerful chapter that really reveals what you're talking about with your friend, the impossible nature, that extraordinary aspect of some of these patients that we don't understand because of the way our society is shaped.
Yeah, sure. Okay. I will get my glasses on. Okay, so yeah, this is the end of chapter one, and Tessa has, we've been through with her right through a psychotic episode, and this is the very last moment of it. And she's in her sitting room, And people keep appearing, and they are her mental health team. Her husband's there, her friend's there, and her psychiatrist is there. Everyone was looking at her. Claire on the sofa, Scott in the middle of the room, the two women in blue jackets, Dr. Stemping one step closer. The policewoman. Where was the policewoman? She was sure she'd been there. People were appearing and disappearing, and she couldn't make it out. The man in the trilby smiled. Tessa ran for the stairs. One of the women in blue jackets caught her as she reached the first step. The rest was a blur for Tessa, a blur she knew too well. Arms held down, screaming and crying and kicking at Scott and women in blue jackets. A strap too tight, an ambulance too bright, shouting and light smacked with darkness, a sleep that gave no rest, a knowledge deep inside that she was dying. She struggled and kicked. She cried and pushed away, refused the drugs and shouted at them to let her go. They never gave her enough time. They never let her be. They always interrupted as if they knew, they didn't understand, that she could see stars. As the ambulance bumped away from her house and headed for the main road, Tessa in the back lolled quietly, the silence of trauma ringing changes with the rush of the road beneath her. Makes
They
me want to
didn't
cry.
even say we could see stars. I know it is such a
Yeah.
powerful opening, Eleanor. I mean, and such, I mean, I would, anybody that's reading this that has struggled with mental health disorders or a feeling of not even being seen, which we all feel, we resonate with this experience, and especially those that have suffered at the hands of society. I wonder for Tessa, when so for the listeners, she tears up the house sort of to mirror this chaos that she's been feeling within, and that's precipitates the authorities coming in. Do you see this as a rejection of the societal expectations, or was it a cry for understanding? What precipitated this inside for Tessa?
Well, I think this, what comes before is her, or rather, maybe that's the chapter slightly later, but she has this obsession with doing up her kitchen. And the society in which she lives and the society in which I modeled her has this habit of kind of selling the perfect. And she grew up in an environment of selling the perfect at all times. And one of the themes of the book is this, the inside not matching the outside. And I think when your inside world is chaos and you're not able to express it and you have to keep it shut down and as if you're absolutely fine. And I think that's a reason why there's such an emphasis on having the perfect home and the perfect table and the perfect, because it keeps this lie up all the time. And I don't really trust anyone whose home is too perfect. If I cannot stand it, because I know that means that inside of that person, it's more than a mess. It's a dangerous chaos in there. And I feel for them because they're trying to hold this perfect up. And so when she rips the house up, it was also slightly, there's another friend I know who suffers psychosis, and she always floods the house. And in fact, somebody else I know, it's one of their things. They always flood the house. And it's just this kind of, this inside bursting out to just wash away, clean it. It's a total demolition of the outside lie, really, I think. And I
Yeah,
think that's,
almost subconscious. I mean, the force is so strong that it's not like
yeah,
Tessa said deliberately, I'm going to tear up the house
no,
now. It's a way bigger force.
it's way bigger than her. And with all of these things, I know I mean, I'm sure you know Gabor Mate, right? And
Hmm.
he always, he has he starts from a place of everything you're doing is keeping you safe, whether it's drinking yourself to death or smashing up the house. He starts from that position where what you are doing is keeping yourself safe. And if you start from that position, you can get inside somebody and understand why they're doing what they're doing. So what Tessa's doing by smashing up the house is keeping herself safe.
Yeah.
It might not
Yeah.
look like that. It might look like wholesale destruction, but actually we are fully designed to survive and keep ourselves safe. And that is literally what she's doing. She's just trying to equalize. It's a bit like when you get the bends, it's like she's trying
Yes.
to equalize the inside with the outside
Oh my
because
gosh.
no one's listening.
Yeah, I was just thinking, the dizziness that I experienced, especially when it was in its, the heightened version of itself. I needed my world to be very, very, very small. It was that equilibrium
Yeah.
you're talking about, where everything
Yeah.
needed to be methodical and expected, and to the point where you would have walked into the house and gone, "What's wrong with this person?"
Yeah.
Because the chaos was all inside.
Right.
But then,
But yeah,
yeah,
that
it,
equalization, exactly. And I think that's what we're all striving to do all the time. It's just equalize, equalize, equalize all the time and find that balance, just as nature's trying to do that.
yeah,
And so I mean, that's my starting point with understanding anyone, actually, whether they're characters on the page or someone I'm talking
yeah.
to. We're all just trying our best to equalize.
So you actually embody. I'm imagining that you embody your characters, because to me they're so visceral. And for example, when Tessa gets caught up in this episode, it is jarring. And I want to ask you if you actually took yourself there to write it, because I'm going to just read this couple sentences because it just is. I mean, I get caught up in it just reading it. Tessa is in the throes of the episode, and you write, she could almost close her eyes and be carried with it. It's a force. Its force was so strong. It lifted her from sorry, I can't read all of a sudden. Let me just open this up. It lifted her from hall to waterfall of stairs. It moved her gracefully, as if swirled and danced. No longer in charge had she ever been. Music played incessantly, songs of childhood that spoke of how things ought to be. She was beautiful. She was cared for. When she opened her eyes, she'd landed by the fridge. Somebody had smashed up the kitchen, so Tessa went shopping. I mean, I just love this experience that you took us on, roller coaster. Did you inhabit, Tessa, to write that? And how do you kind of draw that line between, falling into the stereotypes and the tropes of mental illness, and also just, speaking to her experience as it is?
Yeah, I mean, I think every character, I embody them 100%. That's the only way I know how to do it. So I absolutely, technically, I'd call it close third. I'm right inside them, and I'm 100% seeing the world through their eyes. And and from that position, I just witness what's happening. And I think that's why, I mean, often get the feeling, when I hear my work read back to me, I don't really remember writing it. I know I did because my name's on the book, you know what I mean? But I don't really, honestly, it's not me. The me who's sitting here now talking to you is not the me who does that work, who writes those very early drafts and characterizations and all the rest of it, because I absolutely have to. I don't even feel like I get inside them. I just turn up at the page. And I think when you're working on that level, who's inside who becomes kind of moot, because it's a whole other something going on there. I can't really describe it. So whether I walk into them or they walk into me or what's happening, I don't really know. I do know that I've had experiences writing books where, in fact, it's almost happening now really, because I'm working on something new. where I'm so engaged with the character that I do change. I'm a
Yeah, you're like Daniel Day-Lewis of
yeah,
writers.
it's a little bit. I just have to kind of. I find myself not leaving them on the page. I find them,
Wow.
and when I wrote my debut, I really took on the main character and she took on me, and it was a bit of a problem really because I didn't know that had happened. So I started behaving in ways and having certain attitudes that were just absolutely not. But now I've learned, like, okay, just but when they first come, it's like a volcano of fire coming through me. And then I can't, I'm just, they're in me and I'm in them. And I literally I just write what I see and hear and feel.
Yeah.
And, and I think just technically as a writer, you get better at not filtering it. It's definitely for the first draft anyway. Just let it happen because they genuinely know better than you. I mean, they genuinely do. And the book knows better as well. So there's two entities which know better than me in
Wow.
the process.
So you really get out of your own way.
Yeah, I mean
Yeah.
I think as I got older and I've been doing it longer and longer, that's really the skill, is getting out of it, learning how to do that, because everything else will sort itself out. But that takes years of self-discovery and technical know-how to do that. And yeah, because it's a trust exercise like none other, and which is in a way crazy because nobody reads first draft, so who cares if it's gobbledygook? But still,
It's for
but
the essence, though. I mean, I feel like all of that in the first draft, the emotion and the energy that you're putting into it, that's remains, whether the words
yeah,
change.
that's true. That's true, actually. And like the very first, well, that there are aspects like that scene, actually, the psychosis scene, which used to be the third chapter, and I moved it to the first chapter, which that shows, like how I've grown in understanding like plotting and stuff. When I wrote it 5 years ago, I had and I realized now, oh, of course that doesn't work. So I moved it to the front. But yeah, I think that scene was pretty much as is, as I wrote it first time around, because it's so, like, you get in that river at the beginning and you just can't stop until you're in the ambulance at the end, and that's, you know what I mean, it is a river that flows
Yeah,
through. Yeah,
absolutely. And you do, I can feel your steadiness within that chaos. You are comfortable with chaos. And
yeah, yeah,
I really think that works to your advantage as a
yeah,
writer because you really can let yourself go there with your characters then and it feels honest.
yeah. I
So
really
let's,
care about them. I really care.
yeah.
That's the heart of it for me. I really care.
Oh my gosh, I can feel that.
Yeah,
Actually, and I have a question. I want to save it, but I have a question about that too, because as with actors, even if they're a villain or, a horrible
yeah,
presidential candidate, you have to believe in their motivation. So
yeah,
I want to talk to you about that.
yeah,
But let's go get a little personal for a second because you mentioned in another interview with Holly Starley about kitchen themes, and I was actually working out when I was listening to that interview, and I was like, "Oh, this is so great!" Like, and it made me think about what room in the house is my theme, and of course, it was the
yeah.
bathroom.
Right.
But I want to know about the kitchen of your youth because this kitchen theme is important in this novel as kind of this middle class way to deal with life's anxieties. Um, I want to know a little bit about your kitchen of your youth.
Oh, well, it's funny actually. I was thinking about the kitchen of my youth the other day because my nephew is now living in the house that I grew up in, and my gender fluid child went there recently to stay the night. And when they came home, I said, it was a crazy question, but I said, "Is the kitchen still the same?" And they went, "Well, I don't know. I'm only 17. I've never been. What are you talking about?" I was like, "Why did I ask that?" Because it's so mattered to me that the
Yeah,
kitchen is just the
yeah.
same. And the kitchen in that, I grew up in London. And if anyone's read my memoir, it's the big, whatever I called it, the tall White House in London. And the kitchen had a long butcher's block as a table, fully scarred, and we used to have worms used to squiggle out of the table while we were eating in the wood, and the end was like cut, and I used to drive my knife into it. It was very, very long, and fully kind of 1970s kitchen, and with all our funny old paintings on the wall and all that kind of stuff. And I guess, it was the place where we all came together. The house I grew up in in some ways, it was utterly chaotic. There were always a lot of people staying there. My mum was very keen on taking in anyone, really, whether she knew them or not. So there was always a lot of people staying. There was a lot of us. And the kitchen was always busy and full of people. And but I know I had my place there because I was the only one. My place was at the end of the kitchen table. Everyone else sat along, and the table was up against the window, like long ways, so no one could sit at the other end. So for some reason, I always got at the end. So I used to build these walls of cereal packets around myself, so I could watch what was going on and listen, but be completely protected and surrounded by these Weetabix and cornflakes or Cocoa Pops or whatever it was. And I think that's sort of my ideal. Like whenever I I have to go to sleep listening to podcasts because what I love, I think I used to, or I'd be under the table listening. It's like being around lots of people, but having my little cocoon within that place. So I think there was a lot of observance. There was strangers and friends and family and people I couldn't stand and people I really loved were all in that kitchen, and I would sit at the end, I think, and I think there was a lot of observance going on. And for the first 3 books, I guess, I've written, they've all sprung out of a kitchen. Where they've all come from. And I hadn't, until I talked to Holly, actually, I don't think I'd really noticed that.
Wow.
And then, Fallout, although we're in the kitchen again, actually, Fallout begins in the kitchen, but we sort of leave. And then the book I'm writing now is very much left the kitchen. It's like we are,
To the kitchen.
we
Oh,
are out.
brilliant.
Yeah. I think it's taken me 3 novels to leave the kitchen, which is a really
Oh,
interesting in terms of one's maturity and growing up and the processes we go through around, healing relationships with our families and that kind of stuff. It's
yeah.
taken me that amount of time to make my peace with
Hmm.
that kitchen, everybody in it, and be ready to leave home, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that, here I am at 53 and I left home when I was 18, but psychologically in my psyche, it's clearly taken me 3 novels of working stuff through and being in the kitchens of that heart of houses to
Isn't that
leave. And I think,
fascinating?
and I think the other bit of it is as well, actually, that I'm deeply influenced by various writers like Elizabeth Taylor and Penelope Mortimer and Penelope Fitzgerald, and who are really right, and in fact, Jane Austen writes kitchen dramas, if you want to look at it that way. Do you know what I mean? It's very, and so I think I had to work all of those influences out of my system as well.
This makes a lot of sense to me, and I do think in any artist's work you start to see sort of these patterns,
Yeah.
and perhaps, like you said, there's this working out of your own youth and your own traumas, and then when it's done, and it's not again, it's not conscious. It's just kind of like, ah, what else? And you get to leave home and explore the world in a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think it occurred to me today, actually, I mean, obviously I won't go into it, but there was recently something that happened in my family which required most of my siblings to get around the table and talk about something. And I
Mm,
noticed that it was the first time we'd really done, well, it was the most productive. It was and I would have said that 10 years ago, but there's been a movement, that, and for me, that like I watched my behavior, like it's always interesting to watch one's behavior around one's siblings, like, internal family systems, all that, all that stuff, and I
yeah.
watched how now I sit back a little bit and I have different behavior around it. And that's as much a product of the literary work I've done and working that out as it is, the personal work I do with my I work with a somatic experiencing healer and obviously my
Mhm.
insight therapist and everything. So
Somatic experiencing makes a lot of sense to me now that you mentioned that. I'm familiar with that. And it, because of the visceral quality of your work, it makes so much sense to me that that's where a lot of your own healing has come from.
yeah, I mean, it's absolutely changed my world. It's just the
Wow.
most extraordinary. Yeah, I was very lucky to find someone brilliant, and I work with
Yeah.
her. And yeah,
So let's talk a little bit about the trauma that you mentioned at the top of this, because I know, Tessa, as you mentioned, anyone perhaps living with bipolar disorder has experienced some sort of trauma from their
mm.
youth. And I'm so glad that you included this in your
Oh,
book. And sort of this dismissal of her own experience and her own feelings as valid and true that way early on in her development. So in your own life, have you also experienced this cycling of trauma? You're mentioning that now, and I'm wondering if this is a theme also in your own life, and what have you done to break that cycle,
sure. I
including
mean,
sort of the therapy that you've been mentioning.
yeah, I mean, I'm a survivor, and I only understood that to be the case, about 4 years ago, probably. I think just before I started writing the memoir. Um, but I had the experience of, the black box opening in my head and a whole load of stuff coming back that I had successfully shut away to cycle back to this survival mode. That was a very, very successful technique of my brain. It happens to a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, obviously, it's not an easy thing to talk about, but as a result of that, the black box opening in my head, I got sober, and I started working with a somatic experiencing practitioner. Um, and you see, already I can't remember what your question was.
No, and that's fine because it actually, oh, hello, Kitty. Hello,
Yeah,
beautiful.
also Penny has come immediately. But yes,
Oh,
I know what I was going to say. So that when I first started working with her,
hmm.
very first thing she said was that what we're dealing with is complex PTSD, and
Mm,
she explained to me what that was, um, because I've never really been able to understand, like I'm an addict in recovery, but that doesn't, I never fit the what one, the sort of the trope of an addict. You know what I mean? I was absolutely functional. I was doing my thing, but there's no doubt that every single piece of my behavior screams out addict and now addict in recovery. I didn't really understand that. And sometimes I don't really talk about it very much, but if somebody says to me, well, what were you addicted to? That's kind of the wrong question. That's not, that any addict will know that's kind of not, it's kind of irrelevant, because it's what's underneath all of that that is the
yep,
thing. And it was survival mode. And I very successfully self medicated for a very, very long time until I had the resources to stop self medicating and start to dig. And it was my somatic experiencing woman who said, yeah, this is complex PTSD. And then I really started to study that and really got underneath it. So, yes, to go back to the novel with Tessa, um, she, I, in my armchair, I will say that she has complex PTSD, and because it was unrecognized and unheard and undealt with for a very long time, it then progressed into what she was then diagnosed as bipolar, as
yeah.
a way of coping with this unrealized and uncoped with complex PTSD as a result of a trauma in her own childhood.
Yeah, and that the complex PTSD is something that I learned about a few years ago, during a podcast interview. And this woman has, a chronic illness, but was a former physician and quit her practice to learn more about her own earlier traumas. And she was not able to identify a moment that we, prior to complex PTSD, we all thought, oh, well, if you have PTSD, you have to have a moment where something happened. And these little assaults are just as powerful as the one big assault. And often the little assaults, like you're expressing here, are the ones where our own emotional truth is dismissed. So much
Exactly.
so that we end up distrusting our own emotional truth.
Exactly. And that's the complex bit. The PTSD
Yes.
bit is I've been caught in an explosion, or that's but the complex bit is my reality has been denied. That's what makes
Mhm.
PTSD complex,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
suddenly, as you say, you're like, there's nowhere to turn. No, nobody is recognizing your reality. You don't know especially if you're very young, as I was, you don't know what's real, what's not. You've got all these different things going on at once. And so everything just splinters. It
Mhm.
just splits off into different boxes. And well, in my case, you just start running as soon as you possibly can and keep running and I didn't know if I was running towards or away from, it's just,
Yeah.
yeah.
I did the opposite, Eleanor. I imploded. I got smaller
Okay.
and smaller and smaller and smaller and just
Okay.
thought, well, I'm safe if I become what the world wants me to be.
Right.
And then to the point where I'm like, I don't know what I am. I am as long as
Yeah.
I'm what you want me to be. So
Yeah.
similar, but very different reaction.
Right, a totally different response. A great solution to the problem.
Yeah.
You come up with a solution, I come up with a solution. Great for a certain amount of time until that moment comes. And I guess I don't know if you'd agree with this, Kim, but certainly mine was an internal, unconscious understanding that I now had the resources, and that was the shift. I don't know whether you understand your shifts like that, or
My shift was truly like a 2x4 over my head. It was more
yeah,
like I could have kept going.
right,
And
okay,
my body broke down. So the 2x4
yeah,
was my body going, uh-uh.
yeah,
So,
I
so
don't know.
nope. So the implosion wasn't as much conscious as much as it was
Yeah,
physical. And
yeah,
then I had to sort of unravel from there. And,
yeah.
so you have this great line in the book where you say, there is no terror like the terror that your parents are lying. And that type of betrayal is, I think, the original betrayal. And then we repeat these betrayals in 1,000 different ways, in 1,000 different relationships. And you do this so beautifully in this book by introducing, obviously, Tessa's trauma, which is the original through her family of origin, but then through all the different characters that you develop in the story that are also betraying her in a million different ways, consciously and unconsciously. So I want to circle back to some of these characters because they are lovable in their own way, but they're also vile. And I want to know, how do you find compassion for these characters that you write that are less lovable?
Well, I think the first thing is that I know it's absolutely crucial that I find the humanity in them. And I think I leave it up to the reader whether they want to feel compassion, empathy, sympathy, whatever they want to feel. But my job is absolutely to identify, to inhabit the humanity of them, just to remember that specific characters that I'm thinking of and you're thinking of, they were once upon a time, they were a little baby, they were growing up, they didn't know. Just try and get back to that bit. And then, okay, they grew into someone who, you know, yeah, I don't like them right now, or that person is modeled on various people that I don't want in my life. I don't want to engage with that person. But it's not for me to make your mind up as the reader. I'm really a sort of a staunchly a fighter for that in the role of the artist, is to not lead the witness, not tell the reader by use of sort of stereotypes and clunky, clumsy plot and language to make you feel a certain way about someone. And what was really interesting, because it was serialized, it was really interesting in real time seeing different people's responses to different characters. And to my great surprise, there were some people who really loved certain people who I really didn't, and really didn't like people that I really did. And I just thought, okay, I thought, okay, no, actually, I'm doing my job. That's good. That's good, because they really relate to that person. And there is, their humanity, or maybe their act outs, or maybe their something, they're relating, and they're allowed to relate. And that's okay. Do you know what I mean? So I think, I was listening to Samuel Lopez Barrantes talk about this in his book, The Requisitions, the other day, and he said exactly the same thing. And his book is about Nazi invasion of Poland and the ghetto in Lodz ghetto. And he was asked the same question: How do you write characters that are just so appalling? Like, how do you, And he said the same thing. You've got to find the humanity in them and sit in there and just let them. Those characters will be who they want to be anyway. Like, I don't have to make any effort to make them nice or not nice. They will be who they want to be. My job is to sit in the humanity of them, and
Yeah.
let them dig their own grave. It's like, it's not my problem. It's not my job. They'll really do it, which they do. And also, importantly, in this one, there's a specific character who is the kind of anti-hero to Tessa's hero. And I did have to struggle to find, just to give a moment to let the reader who might be making assumptions about this person, to let them in and see their origin story and why they're like they are. And it was important. It, it was really important to me that we do that and understand that, even though the solution they came up with how to live their life is one that I find incredibly difficult and unbelievably destructive. But it's not really their fault that society doesn't treat them the same as the other person,
That's
is
a
it?
really good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. And it makes sense to me too that the way that you approach these characters, or the way that you approach writing in general, is that you show us. There's no even in your dialogue, it's just there is so much happening in your dialogue, but it's not explained. It's just shown, which I just love. The pace of that is it breathless actually for me. And sometimes I really have to slow my own pace down so that I'm catching everything, but you never ever explain, which I just love. It's a
I believe my readers are really intelligent people. They'll figure it out. They'll get it. They are. They will figure it out and get it. And somebody posted the other day on Substack. I think, I can't remember what their publication is called, but they pick out beautiful sentences, and they picked out one by Doris Lessing, and I'll find it. Maybe we can put it in the show notes or something. But it was just, again, it was just, if I can just produce just enough for my reader's imagination to fill in the scene, then that's great, and we can get on with something else. Like, I don't need to, I'm a reader. My imagination's great. I don't need much. Let
yeah,
me run. So
yeah.
that's I try and do, because actually there's so much of the story to tell, and
Mm.
and readers are clever, and the imagination is the most beautiful. I don't know what to describe it. It's not a tool or a resource. This invention that we have, which we call an imagination, is just absolutely phenomenal.
Mm.
And I just let it. I just need to put in the magic ingredients, and then it just bing like that. That's my plan,
Yeah.
anyway.
It's such a lovely way of putting it. I even, Eleanor, you even do it in your, so you have the dialogue and that's happening, but then even in your narration, or as you're just, walking someone into a scene, it's like you're noticing, the table and then the cat on the end of the table and then the lamp. And it's just comma, 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 comma. You're walking, walking, walking into the scene. And there is so much that my imagination does as you're almost like a painter. You're painting or turning the lights on in the room and illuminating the whole space so that our own imaginations can then take what we need from that. It's a thrilling style. And I don't, not everybody has that same style, but I have to say it's quite addictive.
Thank
Now I'm
you.
like, I read other things and I'm like, they should tighten that up, like Eleanor.
I love it. Yeah.
So, speaking of all these characters and these scenes that you paint, you set this whole story in a small town, which of course acts as a pressure cooker for rumors and judgments. So I want to hear a little bit about your decision to paint this beautiful story in a small town and how that conveys larger themes around stigma and isolation.
Well, I think anybody who knows England knows that the home counties is an absolutely perfect
Mm.
place for um, deceit and um, and selling the perfect and uh, causing each other terrible distress. It's such a small, it's such a pressure cooker. And I chose Midhurst in West Sussex because I know it very well. I know that it's full of people there's a range of economic backgrounds there, but there's a vast majority of people who've moved to Midhurst who are, comfortably off. They're checking out each other's houses. They're all wondering if they're all going to the polo. There's a lot of social climbing and competitiveness, and which, interestingly, individual friends who live in Midhurst, or everybody individually doesn't like it and is sick of it and doesn't want it, but there's a herd mentality, as a clubbing together, which is, again, it's a survival mechanism. If everyone's going to that dinner party, why aren't I? And or you've got that pony, or your children are going to a particular school, so it's a kind of ready-made scene setting, stage set. For me, it's like I don't really have to make anything up.
Yeah.
They do have an amateur dramatic society. It's not called the Midhurst. It's not called the Mads. It's called something else. But I
Yeah.
had to. In fact, a friend of mine came up with that. Thank you, Felicity.
No.
Um, but yeah, I think I could have chosen anywhere in the southeast. I know Midhurst really well, and because it's a naturally the stage is set. I don't have to do anything. It's just so perfectly there. And
Yeah.
also because, again, I won't give this away, but there's a particular geographic setting to the various roads that go in and out of Midhurst, which was required for the very ending of the novel.
Yes, absolutely. And it gives those societal expectations. I mean, it puts it in a under a microscope because of course we all live with societal expectations. But
Sure.
when it's a small town, we really feel those, not just from society, but from each other. And
Right. And I think that's why, as well, it worked well because I needed somewhere that one of the characters would move into. Roz moves into that society. And so we see the experience of arriving, wanting to join in, wanting to be part of, meeting people, the
mm,
snobbery, the cliqueiness of it. And also, let's not forget, it's a farming community as well. And there's a
yeah.
farmer in the book, Brian, who plays a small yet significant part in the novel. And so there's a range of kind of backgrounds going on there.
Mm.
And I think I wanted, and the friend who inspired the novel lives somewhere very similar, and I witnessed how society would treat her in various different ways depending. And you know,
Yeah.
I just needed
Different.
it. It wouldn't
She
have
was
worked in
treated
London.
differently based on where she was living, meaning
Yeah, it wouldn't have worked. The novel wouldn't have worked in London. I think she would have been
Mhm.
treated in a different way. But there, in a small West Sussex market town, you
Mhm.
know, running down the street with your knickers on your head is not going to get compassion from anyone. Let's be
Yeah,
frank.
exactly. I mean, and in Portland, we can we can see all sorts of different behaviors, and it's dismissed in another way, but there's also a lot more of it, and so we kind of just go, okay, that's someone having a day, and
Yeah,
and and we sort of ignore it. But in your book, there is no ignoring. It becomes the center of the town, really. I mean, God, they all don't have anything else to talk about.
right. And there's a code of conduct that is unhelpful when it comes to not being. I think there's a scene very early on when Tessa turns up to a barbecue, a late summer barbecue, and she knows how she's supposed to behave, and she knows what she's supposed to say, and she does those things, but we know, because we've got her internal, that's not, it isn't at all how she wants to behave, and not the thing she wants to say at all. She wants to disrupt the whole thing and turn over the table with the Chablis on it, and etc.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I know, and I've been in that. I can't. I live a very isolated life. Actually, I'm not too far away from Midhurst. I'm quite sure the people in Midhurst will never speak to me again, but it doesn't matter because I live pretty isolated anyway, and I keep myself to myself. And I have a couple of friends around here, but I really don't go out, and I keep all my social down in the West Country, and just to avoid all of that dinner party nightmare.
Yeah, well, and you have so many characters alive in you all the time. I would imagine you never want for company.
Right, I don't. Loneliness is not something I suffer from at all. No, yeah, it's all going on all the time. Good Lord. Yeah.
So we're nearing the end here, and I have a couple more questions, but I want to make sure we leave a little bit of time to just promote this wonderful book. Um, I think one of the challenges with writing mental illness, or that I've struggled with creating content about chronic illness, is that we can either romanticize or we can villainize, and how to walk that line where there's the truth of the experience, but there's also the hope and the resilience. So how did you sort of balance those realities of mental illness with hope and resilience?
Yeah, that was a really important part to me, that it would be so easy to write this novel with a kind of patsy ending of either, I don't know, she wasn't on meds and then she went on meds, or she started doing exercise, that kind of like. And the fact is, anybody who lives with any kind of condition which is debilitating to their everyday enjoyment of life knows that there is absolutely no one answer for anybody ever. So it's all very well to meet somebody with the same condition as you, but even then, unsolicited advice, as we all know, is really a bore because what works for me may not work for you. So I really didn't want to get into any kind of tropes around what Tessa needed to do and not do. Firstly, about it being her fault or not fault, or the background to it at all, not get into any stereotypes around bipolar, but particularly as we near the end of the novel, and she's sort of coming up for air, and we almost get the most. We do kind of get the most sane her. I'm using that word very carefully near the end, in terms of kind of quiet balance, where she's able to take a breath and look around where she really is and not be firefighting. That's what I mean. I think by the end, we get to Tessa in a place where she's not firefighting. For most of the novel, she's firefighting, and then near the end, she's not. And it was really important that I leave her on a note which is purely about management and her own decisions around management, and listening to the people around her who ask her around management to do certain things for them to help her. But also that it wasn't like there's no happily ever after. The fact is, Tessa lives with this condition, and sometimes it's okay and sometimes it's not okay, and sometimes she does everything she's supposed to do and it still doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? Because that is literally what life's like. It's like healing is like that.
Yeah, it's called Unfixed for
It's
me.
called Unfixed, man, and it's absolutely so. It was really important to me that we leave Tessa in a very real place, a really relatable place that neither shames anyone who's reading it, who has her experience and doesn't manage to have some sort of happy ending like she's got. I didn't want that. I didn't want somebody who lives with a similar condition to be like, either be like, well, that's not how it is. I didn't want that, and I didn't want to shame them by making Tessa some sort of example of if you do all of this, it's a happy ending, because that's totally unfair and it's not life. So
Yeah.
I was really important to me that I just, I leave her in a place that's quite normal,
Yeah.
not dramatic. It's just like some days are good and some days are bad. I mean, I'm not going to completely ruin it because there's other things to the ending,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. Yeah.
ultimately, that in
Yeah.
terms of tone and feeling, and not dropping into stereotypes, and avoiding all tropes around mental illness, it's absolutely an individual experience. How one goes into it will have been born of something individual. How one experiences it and the solutions we come up with when we're in the throes of it are entirely individual. And then how we move on, if we're lucky enough, to some sort of no longer firefighting management section of our lives of healing, is again 100% individual. It's
Yeah.
just, right, it
Yep.
just is. And
We
if
call it the new normal in the chronic illness
right,
community. It's like sort of you go through all the firefighting stages of what is this and why am I, the grieving, and then you get to a point where it's like, okay, this is my new normal. It's not perfect.
yeah,
And but it's going to be, this is my new normal, which is, all over the place,
okay,
whatever. But,
right,
and there's a
right.
grace, I think, with that.
I think there's an enormous grace with it. There's and that's from my own experience. There's an enormous sense of like, just like that, not constantly striving for some impossible something,
Yeah.
but just seeing the landscape just roll out in front of me, like, oh, okay, there's time and there's space, and I'm doing my best. And I don't have to tell anyone. I don't have to shout it from the rooftops. I don't have to suddenly present fixed. It's nobody's business. And actually, my honest relationship with myself and this thing, and I know that you talked about this as well, what it is giving me in terms of my own learning, which is another part of trauma and healing and the whole unfixed process of it. There are moments in my own where I think, okay, I hate to admit it, but this has given me certain things and I'm going to look
Yeah.
at those as well. And, there's just like, but I think I have that experience of no longer firefighting and seeing the landscape roll out in front of me, and there's time, and let's just all take a breath. And I think that's the place where that was that very real place that I wanted to get to with Tessa. I didn't know if she was going to get there, by the way, when I was writing the
Yeah.
book, because you never know with the
Really.
character. Yeah, you never know.
Ah,
But
are you a painter? I just have to ask because the way you speak, I have these big visions just start spilling out of my head as the landscape rolling out in front of me. That's going to be with me forever because of
yes,
you just saying that. But it's such a beautiful, concrete way to imagine ourselves into the life that we are living. And it's kind and it's gentle and but are you a painter?
I'm not. No, I'm not. I've always wanted to be a sculptor. If I wasn't a writer, I'd be a sculptor, I think.
Oh,
Yeah,
oh, beautiful.
yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, no, never painted. I tried
So
everything else.
my last question for you is just you carry such wisdom and I think you entered into writing this story with an abundance of wisdom and the experience that you also had with your friend. But did anything change for you writing these characters and your perspective on mental health and how you live with it now or your relationship even with your friend? Did anything transform as you wrote this story?
Um, I I don't think so enormously, actually, because I'd been 30 years with her through it. I think the only thing that changed, actually, there was some, which was because of my own experience with healing complex PTSD trauma, surviving, was that element of management rather than fixed and done and an end point. I think that's the only thing, really. So now when I mean, but I wrote Tessa a long time ago, really before all of that kind of bloomed in my head. Although I did, I think, kind of really rewrite the ending that when I streamed it. So I think I arrived at a much, much more a compassionate place and a much deeper understanding of how vital arriving at some form of management within oneself around what we have to deal with, how important that was. So I think I think I did gain a deeper understanding, but I don't think it was through writing the book. It was through working through my own trauma and then streaming the novel and editing it and then rewriting. The ending was always sort of that, but I pretty much rewrote it. And I think I rewrote it with a much, if I know I did, a much deeper understanding of uh, how to live with
Yeah.
what Tessa had. I think that's it. I've just how to live with it and the management of expectations and the management of expectations of her friends as well. And so I know, like, so as the friend of my impossible friend, I take a tough line with her in terms of management. Like, I know there are places where she's capable of management, and then I absolutely know there aren't. And when we speak, I tend, because I know there aren't a lot of people in her life who just believe her, begin at a position of believing her. That's my position always, no matter where she is in her psychosis roundabout. I always go with believing. That's the very first thing. So it doesn't matter what she's telling me. And because you need at least one person in your life who believes you, whatever's
Yeah.
coming out of your mouth, right? It couldn't be more important.
Yeah. You're
And
unraveling her trauma by doing that. I mean,
right,
that's
just little by little, she's blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, and I just listen and let her say it out, because once you get it out, then it's not here. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think
Wow.
I know there's a bit in the novel about parents lying to you and the inside matching the outside, and that I think lying to our children and I made an absolute point. I never lie. I never
Mm.
lie to them.
Yeah.
I'll let them be children. I won't load them with adult stresses, but
Yeah.
I do not lie to them, because it's lying which chips away at, like, what is reality and who am I?
Oh,
And
absolutely. It's the
and
incongruency. The
oh,
incongruency
it's
is, I mean,
crazy.
I don't know if it was Gabor Mate, but incongruency is one of the traumas that children experience, where they like
Right.
feel something and then they're told something
And they're told
else.
it's not happening. Exactly. So for my impossible friend, I little by little, I believe her as she tells me things. And I think, if I could speak to Scott and Claire in the novel now, I don't know if any of the characters do say that to each other, but it is absolutely just believe them, let them speak. You don't have to have a judgment. That's why it's called In Judgement of Others. You don't have to have a judgment over it. To put your judgment aside. It's not the place for judgment. And if you can't believe them, don't speak to them.
Yeah,
Just say
yeah,
no. Do you know what I
yeah.
mean?
That's huge.
It's huge.
That is it. It's huge, Eleanor. It's huge. And I have chills as you talk about it, because I know the people that are listening and the people that will read this book will just be like, thank you.
Yeah, I did get a very sweet another friend who's been through a similar. I sent her a galley copy, and she messaged me and she said thank you, and that really, I was just like, oh
Uh,
my, okay, that means a huge amount.
I'm so excited for this to come out. I'm
Mm,
just thrilled. And like I mentioned at the top, this is coming out January 28th, which is only a few weeks away. And it's available globally. You're doing in all good bookstores. You're
yeah.
doing a recording, so it'll be on Audible, which will be lovely because your voice is incredible. And I want to also say, for fellow Substackers, I read this when it was serialized, and then to prepare for this interview, I went back and reread the whole thing like within a couple days. And boy, does it need to be read and like binged. It needs this format. I mean, it was extraordinary as a serialized, but the characters really, really moved me to another level when I could just have them in my hands and when I could hear them in my head and live with them and dream with them. So I'm so glad that this is going to be available. And I know also that you do Q&As for book clubs. This should be on everybody's book list. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, I love turning up to book groups. So if there are book clubs out there, book groups who want to pick it for their monthly read, and you'd like me to zoom in and do a Q&A after you've all read it, I'd be absolutely delighted. I really
Amazing.
enjoy it. I think, every reader matters. That's my mantra. And
Mm.
I just love connecting with readers because that's what it's all about. You complete the book. When I read someone else's book, I'm completing that book. Books, they need to be read. And when I get to witness that full circle, it's just the best thing in the world. So yeah, please do. You can contact me through my website or DM me on Substack or whatever. And I'd be delighted.
Brilliant. Eleanor, thank you so much for this
Okay.
time. It makes me want to, I have all these ideas now sparking, but like maybe we should also hold a forum or something, because when you speak about this book and then you speak about your own experience, there's so much wisdom there and passion too from it comes from within, and I feel some of that rage that started this book even. And so I think it's going to be important to gather people together to talk about this book after they've read it. So anyway, we can talk about that,
Okay.
but
Thanks, Kim.
beautiful work. Thank
Oh,
you. Thank
thanks,
you.
my
Thank
darling.
you. You are so
So,
lovely, and it's an honor to share this time with you, really, truly.
yeah, well, ditto. I think you're amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.